Jacob and Emily were once the couple everyone envied. They had built a life of apparent happiness, a love that seemed untouchable. Emily, a kind and selfless woman, gave her heart completely to Jacob. He was her rock, or so she thought. Then the diagnosis came. Cancer. Terminal. The words crushed Emily's world like a tidal wave, sweeping away every ounce of certainty she had. Emily needed Jacob, now more than ever. Her parents had passed away just 10 days before she discovered her illness in a car accident that left her reeling. With no family but her younger sister Claire and Jacob, she leaned on them to endure the darkest days of her life. But Jacob, instead of holding her hand through the storm, sought solace elsewhere. The betrayal began quietly, missed visits, indifferent glances, and the faint smell of a perfume Emily didn't own. While Emily battled for her life, Jacob began an affair with her sister Claire. For 2 months, Jacob maintained the facade of a loving husband. He kissed Emily's forehead in the hospital and whispered empty promises of better days. But behind her back, he plotted his escape, waiting for the moment he could take everything Emily had built for herself and disappear into a new life with Claire. What Jacob didn't know was that Emily, even in her frail state, had noticed the cracks in his lives. She might have been weak in body, but her spirit was unyielding. The betrayal came to light one rainy Tuesday evening when Emily noticed Jacob's absence. He had promised to spend the night with her at the hospital, but as the hours dragged on, she realized he wasn't coming. Her instincts told her something was wrong. Jacob had been distant for weeks, his once loving eyes now filled with impatience. Emily brushed it off as stress from her illness, but now she couldn't ignore it. She called his phone. No answer. The second call went straight to voicemail. Emily clutched the thin hospital blanket as a cold dread settled over her. She reached for her laptop and opened Jacob's email, a boundary she never thought she'd cross. It didn't take long to find what she feared. Messages between Jacob and Claire, the woman she had trusted most in the world. "Can't wait to see you tonight," read one message. Another, "She'll never find out." Just a little longer, Emily's heart shattered. The pain wasn't just in discovering the affair, it was in the realization that Jacob had betrayed her at her most vulnerable. She was already drowning in grief, mourning her parents while grappling with the reality of her terminal illness. Now, the betrayal felt like a knife twisting in her chest. The next morning, Emily confronted Jacob. She didn't cry or scream. She was too exhausted for that. Instead, her voice was calm, almost eerily so. "I know about Claire," she said, her eyes locking onto his with a strength he hadn't seen in months. Jacob's face drained of color. "Emily, it's not what you think." "Don't lie to me," she interrupted, her voice steady. "I've read the emails. I know everything." For a moment, Jacob was silent. Then, as if a switch flipped, his demeanor changed. He crossed his arms and sneered. "What did you expect, Emily? You've been so wrapped up in your own problems. Do you even realize how hard this has been for me?" The words hit her like a slap. "Hard for you," she repeated, incredulous. "I'm dying, Jacob. My parents are gone. I've lost everything. And you're the one who's suffering?" He didn't apologize. Instead, he blamed her illness, her grief, her emotional distance. Emily realized then that the man she had loved was gone, or maybe he had never existed. That night, Jacob didn't return to the hospital. Emily lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, her tears falling silently. She thought about the life she had dreamed of, the love she had believed in, and the betrayal that now defined her reality. But amidst the pain, a spark ignited within her. Emily decided that Jacob's betrayal wouldn't be the end of her story. If she had only a few months left to live, she would use them to reclaim her power. After confronting Jacob, Emily spiraled into a pit of despair she had never known. The betrayal felt like a weight crushing her chest, making it hard to breathe. Each day in the sterile hospital room was a cruel reminder of her isolation. The walls seemed to close in on her, suffocating her with memories of a life that once felt whole. Emily clung to the last voicemail her mother had left before the accident. "You're stronger than you think, sweetheart. her mother's voice echoed. But even those words, once a source of comfort, felt hollow now. She was anything but strong. Her health began to decline rapidly. The cancer spread, eating away at her body and draining what little energy she had left. The nurses would check on her, offering sympathetic smiles, but their kindness only deepened the ache of loneliness. In moments of desperation, Emily considered calling Claire. She longed to scream at her sister, to demand answers for the betrayal that had gutted her. But the thought of hearing Claire's voice, soft and deceitful, was unbearable. Jacob's absence was both a relief and a torment. She no longer had to endure his empty promises, but the void he left behind was filled with memories of their life together. Every laugh they'd shared, every promise of forever, now felt like cruel lies. One night, Emily's grief boiled over. She threw the framed photo of her and Jacob from their wedding against the wall, watching as the glass shattered into jagged pieces. The sound echoed in the small room, but it didn't bring the relief she hoped for. Instead, it left her staring at her own reflection in the shards, seeing a woman she barely recognized. But even in her darkest moments, Emily felt a flicker of something deeper, an ember of resolve. She didn't want her story to end like this. The following morning, Emily woke to a beam of sunlight piercing through the blinds. For the first time in weeks, she felt a sliver of clarity. She wasn't just a victim of Jacob's betrayal or her illness. She was still Emily, a woman who had dreams, resilience, and a will to fight, even if the battle seemed unwinnable. Emily called Sarah, an old college friend she hadn't spoken to in years. Sarah had always been the pragmatic one, the kind of person who could turn chaos into order. When Emily shared her story, Sarah didn't offer pity. She offered a plan. "You're not done yet, Sarah said firmly. "You've got more power than you think. Let's use it." Over the next few weeks, Emily began taking control of her life in small but significant ways. She reached out to an attorney and started working on her will. Every decision she made was deliberate, ensuring that neither Jacob nor Claire would benefit from her estate. Instead, she chose charities close to her heart, organizations that supported cancer patients and children in need. The process was painful, a constant reminder of her limited time. But with each step, Emily felt a little stronger. She wasn't just preparing for the end, she was reclaiming her narrative. Emily's decision to fight back wasn't born from anger, but from a deep desire to regain control over her life. She realized that every moment she spent lamenting Jacob's betrayal or Claire's deceit was a moment stolen from her. This wasn't just about punishing them, it was about honoring herself and the life she had left. Her first step was visiting an attorney, Mr. Porter, a calm and understanding man in his late 50s. When Emily walked into his office, frail but determined, he immediately recognized her resolve. "Ms. Dawson," he greeted, gesturing for her to sit. "How can I help you?" Emily laid out her situation, sparing no detail about Jacob's infidelity or Claire's role in the betrayal. She explained her terminal diagnosis and her desire to rewrite her will. "I need to ensure that neither of them sees a penny of my estate," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion bubbling underneath. Mr. Porter nodded. "We can absolutely make that happen. But may I suggest something more impactful?" Emily tilted her head, intrigued. "We can structure the will to reveal its contents only in specific circumstances," he explained. "For example, a posthumous reading that ensures they understand why they've been excluded." The idea sparked something in Emily, a sense of justice that went beyond revenge. She agreed, and together, they crafted a will that not only protected her assets, but also served as her final message to Jacob and Claire. As the legalities were being sorted, Emily began focusing on herself for the first time in years. She joined a local support group for cancer patients. At first, she hesitated to share her story, unsure if she could handle exposing her pain to strangers. But when she finally opened up, the response was overwhelming. "You've been through so much," one member said, tears in her eyes. "But you're still here. That says something about your strength." The group became a lifeline for Emily. She found solace in their shared struggles and inspiration in their resilience. These people, who had faced unimaginable challenges, taught her the value of community and the healing power of empathy. Emily also rediscovered her love for painting, a passion she had abandoned long ago. She spent hours in her small apartment, creating vivid, emotional pieces that expressed the depths of her journey. Her artwork became her voice, a way to channel her pain and triumph into something tangible. Meanwhile, Jacob and Claire were oblivious to Emily's transformation. They continued their affair, believing that Emily's silence signaled her acceptance of their betrayal. Jacob, in particular, had grown complacent, convinced that he would soon inherit Emily's estate and live a life of luxury with Claire. But their relationship wasn't as idyllic as they pretended. Jacob's guilt manifested in irritability and paranoia, while Claire, torn between loyalty to her sister and her affair, began to question her decisions. The foundation of their relationship, built on lies and deceit, started to crumble. One evening, as they sat in a fancy restaurant Jacob could barely afford, Claire confronted him. "Do you ever think about what we've done to Emily?" she asked, her voice trembling. Jacob scoffed.
"She'll be fine.
"People get over these things." Claire's face darkened. "She's dying, Jacob. This isn't something you just get over." For a moment, Jacob looked uncomfortable, but he quickly dismissed it. "What's done is done, Claire. There's no point in dwelling on it." But Claire couldn't shake the gnawing guilt. The image of Emily's tear-streaked face haunted her, and Jacob's indifference only made it worse. Emily, meanwhile, was flourishing in her own way. Despite her declining health, she felt more alive than she had in years. She began organizing her affairs, ensuring that every detail of her legacy reflected the person she wanted to be remembered as. She also started writing letters to Jacob, to Claire, and to herself. The letters to Jacob and Claire were not angry or accusatory. They were reflections of her pain and a testament to her strength. To herself, she wrote a promise to live fully and authentically, even in her final days. Her newfound peace caught the attention of those around her. The nurses at the hospital, who had once pitied her, now admired her resilience. Sarah, her old friend, became a constant presence, helping Emily with everything from estate planning to grocery shopping. "You're incredible," Sarah said one afternoon as they sipped tea in Emily's small kitchen. Emily smiled. "I'm just trying to make the most of what I have left." As the weeks turned into months, Emily's health continued to deteriorate, but her spirit remained unbroken. She knew her time was running out, but she was determined to leave the world on her terms. On one of her final visits to the hospital, she handed a sealed envelope to Mr. Porter. "This is for the will reading," she said. "Make sure they're both there." Mr. Porter nodded, understanding the gravity of her request. That evening, Emily returned home and stood in front of her latest painting, a vibrant, chaotic swirl of colors that seemed to pulse with life. She had titled it Resilience. As she stared at the piece, a sense of calm washed over her. She wasn't afraid anymore. She had faced her darkest moments and emerged stronger, not despite her pain, but because of it. In her heart, she had already forgiven Jacob and Claire, not for their sake, but for her own. Forgiveness was her final act of defiance, a way to reclaim her narrative and ensure that their betrayal didn't define her. Emily passed away peacefully in her sleep 3 days later, her final painting resting on the easel beside her bed. Emily's passing left a quiet ripple in the lives of those who had cared for her and a storm in the lives of those who had betrayed her. The nurses at the hospital remembered her as a beacon of strength, while her support group honored her memory with a small, heartfelt gathering. Sarah, her steadfast friend, found herself both grieving and inspired, vowing to carry forward the lessons Emily had taught her. For Jacob and Claire, however, Emily's death marked the beginning of an unraveling. Jacob, assuming his inheritance would soon arrive, began making grandiose plans. He spoke of buying a new home, starting a business, and traveling the world, all with Claire by his side. Claire, on the other hand, grew increasingly distant, consumed by guilt and haunted by the choices she had made. The day of the will reading arrived, a gray morning that matched the tension in the room. Jacob and Claire sat together, though there was no warmth between them. Mr. Porter entered, carrying a small stack of documents and a sealed envelope. "Thank you for coming," he began, his tone calm but firm. "Before I begin, I'd like to read a letter left by Ms. Dawson, addressed to both of you." Jacob leaned back in his chair, a smug expression on his face. Claire, however, sat stiffly, her hands clenched in her lap. Mr. Porter opened the envelope and unfolded the letter, his voice steady as he began to read. "Dear Jacob and Claire, if you're hearing this, it means my journey has ended, and yours is about to take an unexpected turn. I won't waste time recounting the pain your betrayal caused me. You already know. Instead, I want to tell you what I've learned in the time since. Pain, betrayal, and loss can break a person, but they can also be the fire that forges something unbreakable. I chose to let them shape me, not destroy me. In the end, I found peace, not because of you, but in spite of you. You may wonder why I'm writing this. It's not to seek revenge or to make you feel the weight of your actions. It's to remind you that choices have consequences, and integrity is something money can't buy. Now, about my estate. I've made my decisions carefully, and I believe they honor the life I wanted to live and the legacy I wish to leave behind. Mr. Porter will explain the details." The room was silent as Mr. Porter folded the letter and set it aside. Claire looked down, tears streaming silently down her face, while Jacob's smug expression had vanished entirely. Mr. Porter continued, his tone measured. "Emily's estate, including her savings, properties, and personal belongings, will not be left to either of you. Instead, she has allocated her assets to several charities, including organizations supporting cancer patients and survivors. Additionally, a portion has been set aside for an annual scholarship in her name, benefiting women pursuing careers in art and therapy." Jacob shot up from his chair, his face red with fury. "What? This is absurd. I was her husband. I deserve—" "You deserve nothing," Mr. Porter interrupted, his voice calm but firm. "Emily made her wishes clear, and my role is to ensure they are honored." Claire began to sob openly, the weight of her actions finally crashing down on her. Jacob, however, refused to accept the outcome. "This is some kind of mistake," he insisted, pacing the room. "She can't do this. She loved me." Mr. Porter raised an eyebrow. "Did she?" As Jacob raged, Claire spoke up, her voice trembling. She knew, didn't she? About us." Mr. Porter nodded. "Emily was aware of everything, but she chose not to confront you because she believed her time was better spent on things that truly mattered." Jacob's anger turned to desperation. "There has to be something, anything. I gave her years of my life. Years that you spent betraying her trust," Mr. Porter replied. "Emily understood the value of her life, and she wanted her legacy to reflect that. You were not part of that vision." For Jacob, the will reading was a humiliating wake-up call. He had expected to walk away with wealth and security, but instead, he was left with nothing but the bitter taste of his own greed. Claire, though equally devastated, felt something shift within her, a glimmer of understanding that perhaps this was the consequence she deserved. As they left the office, Jacob turned to Claire, his face twisted with frustration. "This is your fault. If you hadn't—" Claire stopped him, her voice quiet but firm. "No, Jacob, this is on both of us. We made our choices, and now we have to live with them." In the weeks that followed, Jacob's life unraveled further. Without Emily's financial support, he struggled to maintain his lifestyle. His reputation, once solid, became tarnished as whispers of his betrayal spread. Opportunities dried up, and he found himself increasingly isolated. Claire, on the other hand, sought redemption. She began volunteering at one of the charities Emily had supported, hoping to make amends in some small way. Though the guilt never fully left her, she found solace in helping others, a lesson she wished she had learned sooner. Meanwhile, Emily's legacy flourished. The scholarship in her name inspired countless women to pursue their dreams, while the charities she supported expanded their reach, touching lives in ways Emily could never have imagined. Those who had known her remembered not just her pain, but her resilience, her kindness, and her ability to transform even the darkest moments into something meaningful. And so, even in death, Emily triumphed, not through revenge, but through the strength of her character and the impact of her choices. Jacob's fury at the will reading lingered long after he stormed out of Mr. Porter's office. He had always envisioned himself as the ultimate victor, a man who could manipulate circumstances to his favor. But now, stripped of Emily's wealth and her unwavering support, Jacob's world began to crumble. His first blow came when the lease on his upscale apartment was terminated. Without Emily's financial stability, Jacob couldn't cover the mounting expenses. He moved into a small, dilapidated flat on the outskirts of the city, a far cry from the life of luxury he had grown accustomed to. Claire, unable to bear the tension and burden of their mutual disgrace, left Jacob shortly after. Her departure wasn't just an escape from him, it was an acknowledgement that their relationship, built on betrayal, had no foundation to stand on. Jacob's career faltered next. Colleagues and clients alike began distancing themselves after rumors of his infidelity and Emily's tragic death circulated. The business ventures he had once boasted about fell apart due to lack of funding and trust. Each rejection chipped away at the confident persona Jacob had meticulously constructed over the years. Adding to his misery was the growing realization that he had underestimated Emily's foresight. The charities she funded released public statements honoring her memory, sharing stories of how her contributions were making a tangible difference. Seeing her name celebrated while his own reputation sank into obscurity stung Jacob more than he cared to admit. Jacob's nights became restless, haunted by memories of Emily. Her quiet resilience, her ability to endure pain without succumbing to bitterness, these qualities now seemed to mock him. He would wake drenched in sweat, echoes of her voice lingering in his mind. One night, desperate for some form of absolution, Jacob visited one of the charities Emily had supported. It was a shelter for cancer patients and their families, a place she had spoken of fondly during her final days. As he entered the modest building, Jacob was struck by the warmth and community inside. Volunteers bustled about, serving meals and offering comfort to those in need. On the walls hung photographs of smiling faces, including one of Emily. Beneath it, a plaque read, "In loving memory of Emily Dawson, a beacon of hope, courage, and love." Jacob stared at the plaque, his chest tightening. The woman he had discarded so callously had left a legacy far greater than anything he could have imagined. For Claire, life after Emily's death was an uphill battle as well. The guilt of her betrayal weighed heavily on her, but unlike Jacob, she chose to channel her regret into action. Volunteering at Emily's chosen charities became her way of making amends. One afternoon, while helping organize donations at the cancer shelter, Claire overheard a young woman speaking about how Emily's scholarship had changed her life. "Emily believed in me when no one else did," the woman said, her voice trembling. "She gave me the chance to pursue my dream of becoming a counselor. Now I can help others the way she helped me." Claire felt tears well up in her eyes. Emily's impact was everywhere, her kindness touching lives even after her death. It was a stark reminder of the woman she had wronged, but also an inspiration to strive for better. As months turned into years, Jacob's isolation deepened. His attempts to rebuild his career failed repeatedly, and his health began to deteriorate. The weight of his choices bore down on him, and he found himself reflecting on the life he had thrown away. In his solitude, Jacob began writing letters to Emily. He poured out his regrets, his anger at himself, and his longing for the life they once shared. But he never sent them. Instead, he kept them tucked away in a drawer, a private acknowledgement of the depths of his remorse. Meanwhile, Claire's life took a different trajectory. Through her volunteer work, she found a sense of purpose that had long eluded her. She eventually returned to her love of teaching, using her experiences to guide others toward compassion and integrity. One day, while sorting through some of Emily's belongings that had been donated to the shelter, Claire found a journal. Flipping through its pages, she discovered Emily's reflections during her final months. "I choose to forgive, Not because they deserve it, but because I deserve peace, Emily had written. My life is too precious to be defined by their actions. I will love, I will give, and I will leave behind something that matters. Claire closed the journal, tears streaming down her face. Emily's strength and grace were undeniable, and Claire vowed to carry those qualities forward in her own life. For Jacob, redemption remained elusive. He attempted to reconcile with Claire, but she rebuffed his advances, firmly stating that their past could not be undone. I'm not the same person I was, Claire told him. And you shouldn't be, either. But whatever we had, it's gone. Emily deserved better, and so do we. Jacob was left to face the reality of his choices alone. Though Jacob's life became a shadow of its former self, Emily's legacy continued to shine. The scholarships grew in scope, helping dozens of young women achieve their dreams. The charities expanded their reach, offering hope and support to countless families. Emily's story became a source of inspiration, a reminder that even in the face of betrayal and loss, one could choose love, resilience, and impact over bitterness and revenge. Jacob often wandered the streets near the shelter, catching glimpses of the life he might have had if he had made different choices. He would see Claire laughing with other volunteers or hear stories of how Emily's legacy was changing lives. And though he tried to bury his regrets, they lingered, a constant reminder of the woman he had underestimated and the life he had squandered. As the years passed, Emily's legacy only grew more profound. The scholarships she established began to flourish, empowering countless young women to pursue their dreams. These women became doctors, engineers, and educators, each carrying forward Emily's values of resilience and compassion. Her name was etched in the hearts of all she helped, a beacon of hope in an otherwise cold world. For Claire, the road to redemption became her life's work. Her days at the shelter were filled with purpose as she mentored patients and their families, sharing stories of Emily's courage and her enduring spirit. She had found a path that gave her peace, and though the weight of her betrayal never fully left her, Claire chose to channel it into good. Jacob's decline was stark in contrast. What started as a fall from grace had turned into a complete unraveling. His attempts to rebuild his life were met with failure at every turn. The once confident man was now a shadow of himself, riddled with regret and bitterness. Occasionally, Jacob would pass by the cancer shelter, hoping for a glimpse of Claire or anyone who might still be connected to Emily's world. Though he never mustered the courage to step inside, he would stare through the windows, watching the vibrant life within, a stark reminder of everything he had lost. One day, Jacob received a letter in the mail. It was from a woman named Amelia, who had been one of the first recipients of Emily's scholarship. Her words were heartfelt, though she had no idea Jacob was the recipient. I've heard so many stories about Emily Dawson, the letter began. Her kindness gave me the chance to chase my dreams, and because of her, I've become the person I am today. I just wanted to thank her family for their generosity and let you know how much of a difference Emily made in my life. Jacob read the letter over and over, each word piercing him with the realization of how far-reaching Emily's impact had been. The life he had tried to destroy had become a symbol of hope, outshining every selfish plan he had ever concocted. Claire, meanwhile, stumbled upon an old photo of herself and Emily during one of her volunteer shifts. It was from a family picnic years ago, their smiles wide and genuine. Holding the photo, Claire felt a pang of loss, but also a renewed sense of purpose. She decided to organize an event in Emily's honor, a fundraiser to expand the shelter and its programs. The event would celebrate Emily's life, her courage, and the legacy she left behind. It was Claire's way of making amends, ensuring that Emily's name would continue to inspire others. The fundraiser was a resounding success. People from all walks of life attended, sharing stories of how Emily had touched their lives. Claire stood on the stage, overwhelmed by the love and admiration pouring in for her sister. I made mistakes, Claire admitted during her speech, her voice trembling. But Emily taught me that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to choose love and make a difference. She was the best of us, and it's an honor to carry her light forward. The audience erupted in applause, a testament to Emily's lasting impact and Claire's efforts to honor her sister's memory. Jacob, of course, wasn't invited to the event, but he heard about it through whispers and social media posts. Seeing photos of the fundraiser, with Claire smiling alongside the women Emily's scholarships had helped, filled Jacob with a bitter sense of longing. He tried to reach out to Claire afterward, sending her a message apologizing for his past actions and asking for a chance to make amends. But Claire, having finally found peace, chose not to respond. For Claire, forgiveness wasn't about rekindling relationships or letting people back into her life. It was about releasing the burden of anger and guilt. She had forgiven Jacob and herself, but she knew that moving forward meant leaving the past behind. For Jacob, however, the lack of a response felt like another nail in the coffin of his broken life. He sank deeper into despair, haunted by the reality that no amount of regret could undo what he had done. Emily's name became synonymous with hope and resilience. The shelter grew into a national organization, helping thousands of families across the country. Her scholarships expanded, reaching students in need worldwide. Claire continued to lead the efforts, dedicating her life to ensuring Emily's legacy endured. She found joy in the work, her own life transformed by the lessons her sister had imparted. Jacob, now completely estranged from the world Emily had built, lived in relative obscurity. He spent his days revisiting the letters he had written to Emily, each one a futile attempt to find peace. Despite his attempts to reconnect with Claire or anyone from his past, Jacob remained alone, a cautionary tale of what happens when greed and betrayal overshadow love and loyalty. The years rolled on, but Emily's light never dimmed. Her story inspired documentaries, books, and countless speeches, each one highlighting the power of forgiveness, resilience, and the enduring impact of a life well lived. And while Jacob watched from the sidelines, trapped in the shadows of his choices, the world moved forward, guided by the legacy of a woman who had turned pain into purpose and left a mark that would never fade. Emily Dawson's name had become a symbol of compassion and strength, but her legacy extended far beyond the programs and initiatives she had established. The lives she had touched began to touch others, creating a ripple effect that spanned generations. Claire, now fully immersed in managing the organization, found solace in the stories of those Emily's scholarships and shelters had helped. One such story came from a young woman named Lily, who had survived her own battle with cancer and now worked as a counselor at the shelter. Lily often shared her journey with the women who came seeking help. "Emily's kindness saved me when I thought I had nothing left," she would say. Her story reminds me every day that even the darkest moments can be a stepping stone to something greater. Her words resonated deeply with the patients, many of whom were battling not only illness, but also the emotional scars of abandonment, betrayal, and rejection. Lily's strength and compassion mirrored Emily's, a testament to how one person's kindness could inspire others to rise above their pain. Meanwhile, Claire continued to honor her sister's memory by expanding the organization's reach. She introduced a mentorship program for young women, pairing them with successful professionals who had benefited from Emily's scholarships. One such mentee, a teenager named Sophia, wrote to Claire after completing her first year in medical school. "Dear Claire," the letter began, "I wanted to thank you for believing in me. I never thought someone like me could have a future this bright. Emily's story reminds me to keep going, no matter how hard it gets. I promise to make you both proud." Reading the letter, Claire felt an overwhelming sense of pride and fulfillment. Emily's dream of empowering others was alive and thriving, carried forward by those who had found strength in her story. Jacob, on the other hand, remained stuck in the shadows of his past. His attempts to rebuild his life had left him isolated and bitter. He often scoured the internet for updates on the organization, watching from afar as it flourished. Each success was a painful reminder of what he had lost. Emily's name was celebrated worldwide, while his was a footnote in the tragic chapter of her life. One evening, while browsing a news article about the shelter's latest expansion, Jacob noticed a familiar face in the accompanying photo. It was Lily, a woman he vaguely remembered from Emily's treatment days. Haunted by memories of his betrayal, Jacob decided to write a letter to the organization, apologizing for his actions and offering to volunteer. It was a desperate attempt to find redemption, to be part of the world Emily had created. But Claire, who read the letter, knew better than to reopen old wounds. She chose not to respond, understanding that true healing required letting go of the past entirely. Claire's focus remained on the future. The shelter began offering workshops and classes to help patients rebuild their lives after treatment. From art therapy to financial literacy courses, the programs were designed to empower individuals and give them the tools to thrive. One day, during a painting class, a young girl named Mia created a portrait of a woman with a radiant smile. When asked who it was, Mia proudly replied, "It's Emily. She's my hero." The simplicity of the child's words brought tears to Claire's eyes. Emily's impact had reached even the youngest hearts, a reminder that her legacy would endure for generations to come. As Claire reflected on everything they had accomplished, she realized how much she had grown. The pain of betrayal and loss had once threatened to consume her, but she had found a way to turn it into something beautiful. Her forgiveness of Jacob wasn't about absolving him, but about freeing herself from the chains of resentment. And in doing so, she had found a strength she didn't know she possessed. Jacob, meanwhile, spiraled further into despair. The rejection of his letter was the final blow to his dwindling hope. He began to withdraw from the world, his life a stark contrast to the vibrant community that Emily's legacy had built. He spent his days revisiting memories, replaying the choices that had led him to this point. The life he had envisioned with wealth and freedom had crumbled, replaced by loneliness and regret. But Emily's legacy continued to thrive. Her organization expanded internationally, opening shelters and schools in underserved communities around the world. The ripple effect of her kindness and resilience was unstoppable, touching lives far beyond what she could have imagined. Claire often thought about her sister during quiet moments at the shelter. She would run her fingers over the engraved plaque that read, "In loving memory of Emily Dawson, a light that shines forever." Her grief, once a heavy burden, had transformed into a source of inspiration. Claire's work wasn't just about honoring Emily. It was about ensuring that no one else would face the pain of abandonment and betrayal alone. The ripple effect of Emily's story continued to spread, inspiring documentaries, books, and countless speeches. Her name became synonymous with hope, resilience, and the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. And as the world celebrated Emily's legacy, Jacob's isolation deepened. His attempts to find redemption had failed, leaving him trapped in the shadows of his past mistakes. But for Claire, and for everyone who had been touched by Emily's light, the future was bright. Together, they carried forward her mission, ensuring that her story would never be forgotten. As the years passed, Claire's life became more than just about preserving Emily's memory. It became about changing the world, one life at a time. The foundation she had built from the ground up, fueled by Emily's dreams and her own newfound resolve, had now reached unimaginable heights. But the journey was never easy. Every triumph was met with a new challenge, and Claire knew deep down that the work was never truly done. On the eve of the Foundation's 15th anniversary, Claire stood before a crowd of hundreds in a grand hall, with the sound of applause ringing in her ears. Behind her, a giant screen displayed images of the people they had helped over the years, smiling faces, children in classrooms, women running small businesses. The world had taken notice, and the movement Emily had started, the vision Claire had continued, was now a global force for good. But as she looked out at the audience, her thoughts wandered back to that first day she had received Emily's journals. She remembered the pain, the anger at Jacob's betrayal, the loneliness of watching her sister's dreams wither away, the weight of responsibility that had been placed on her shoulders. It felt like a lifetime ago, yet the emotions were still raw. "Claire," someone called from behind. She turned to find Sarah, a close friend and one of the Foundation's leading advisors. Sarah smiled and gave her a comforting hug. "You did it," Sarah said softly. "Emily would be so proud." Claire nodded, her voice tight with emotion. "I hope so. I've tried every day to make sure she is." Sarah glanced at the stage, where the video of Emily's achievements was playing. "You've more than succeeded. You've created a legacy of love, compassion, and resilience. I know it's hard for you to see it sometimes, but you're doing it. You're keeping her alive, Claire." Claire took a deep breath. "But I still feel like I'm missing something. Like there's a part of me that's always empty. Like I'm not fully whole." Sarah's smile faded slightly. "It's the emptiness that comes with love and loss, Claire. It never fully goes away. But you've filled that space with something incredible. You're making a difference." Meanwhile, Jacob, who had disappeared from the public eye after his failed attempts at redemption, remained lost in his misery. The donation he had made to Emily's foundation had not granted him the peace he sought. It had only served to further expose the depth of his regret. He had visited the foundation's headquarters once, only to be confronted by the walls filled with images of the people his betrayal had hurt. It was like walking through a hall of mirrors, each reflection showing a different version of himself, each one filled with shame and sorrow. In the years since Emily's passing, Jacob had tried to move on, to find solace in other relationships, in distractions. But none of it filled the aching hole inside him. He had hoped that leaving his past behind would offer him peace, but it only made things worse. The more he tried to forget, the more he remembered. The image of Emily's face, the hurt in her eyes as she realized he had abandoned her, haunted him every single day. He had lost everything: his wife, his self-respect, and his humanity. One fateful evening, Jacob found himself sitting alone in his apartment, clutching a crumpled letter. It was an invitation to the Foundation's anniversary gala, the same gala where Claire was about to speak. For a moment, he contemplated attending. Maybe it would give him closure. Maybe he could finally say what he had needed to say for so long. He could apologize, beg for forgiveness, and maybe, just maybe, find a way to make amends. But he quickly discarded the idea. He knew it would never be enough. No apology could undo the damage he had caused. As the evening wore on, Jacob's frustration and guilt mounted. He paced the room, wrestling with his demons, until he found himself in front of the television, watching a news report on the Foundation's success. The new scholarship program, the community outreach efforts, the medical clinics, all of it was a direct result of Emily's vision. And there he was, the man who had destroyed that vision. The following day, Claire stood at the podium, her heart pounding as she prepared to speak. The room was filled with luminaries, philanthropists, government officials, and influential figures from every corner of the globe. It was a far cry from the quiet, intimate gatherings Emily had once held. But Claire had never lost sight of what really mattered: the people. She opened the speech she had prepared, but her eyes scanned the crowd, and something stirred within her. She wasn't speaking just to the audience before her. She was speaking to Emily. To the woman who had given her the strength to endure every setback. To the sister who had taught her the true meaning of resilience. "I'm here tonight," Claire began, "to share something that's been with me since the beginning. The work we've done, the lives we've changed, none of it would have been possible without Emily's vision, her courage, and her love. But there's something even more important that I've come to understand. It's not just about the things we accomplish, but about the people we become in the process." Her voice cracked as she continued. "I stand here before you, a woman who has known deep loss, deep pain, and deep betrayal. But I've also learned that in the face of all that darkness, we have the power to choose who we are. We can choose to let our pain define us, or we can choose to turn that pain into something that heals, that helps, that transforms." The room was silent, everyone hanging on her every word. As we celebrate this milestone tonight, I want to leave you with one final thought. Redemption is possible. It's not always easy. It's not always clean. But it is always worth it. Jacob, miles away, stood by the window of his apartment, watching the rain pour down in torrents. He had heard the words, even though he hadn't been there to witness them. Claire's speech had been broadcasted on television, and somehow, He had found the courage to listen. But the impact was more profound than he ever expected. In that moment, something inside him cracked wide open. He didn't have the answers, and he didn't know how to fix what he had broken. But he knew this much. He had to stop running from the truth. He had to stop hiding from the consequences of his actions. For the first time in years, Jacob made the hardest decision of his life. He sought help. As Claire left the gala, exhausted but fulfilled, she didn't know that her words had reached Jacob. She didn't know that the man who had once betrayed her sister had begun his own painful journey toward redemption. But what she did know was this: no matter what, Emily's legacy would live on, because the true power of love was in the healing it inspired, not just for others, but for oneself. And so, Claire continued, knowing that Emily's story was never really over. It was a story that would continue to shape the world, long after the last chapter was written. The night after the gala, Claire returned to her quiet apartment, her mind still buzzing from the powerful speech and the overwhelming support she'd received. She felt the weight of the years of heartache, betrayal, and sorrow, finally begin to lift from her shoulders. But there was one final thing that needed to be dealt with, one unresolved part of her past that had continued to linger in the shadows: Jacob. Jacob, too, had been left alone with his thoughts after hearing Claire's words. They reverberated in his mind, piercing through the thick layers of guilt and regret that had built up over the years. He knew he couldn't keep running from his past, and he knew that redemption wasn't something he could just ask for. It had to be earned. But where did he even begin? He had no answers, only a deep, gnawing realization that he had been living in the shadows for far too long. His actions, his choices, had shattered everything. He had betrayed the woman he had sworn to love. He had taken from Claire what could never be returned. And now, he had to face the consequences of that betrayal, no matter how painful. The decision came one fateful evening when Jacob, sitting in his dimly lit apartment, glanced down at his phone. He had received a message from Claire. It was short, to the point. "We need to talk." The words made his heart race. After all these years, after everything that had happened, she was giving him one final opportunity to face her. The moment he had feared, the moment he had avoided, had arrived. And he knew, deep down, that he couldn't back out now. Claire, on the other hand, was calm. Her heart had long since stopped racing at the mention of Jacob's name, but she understood the weight of the moment. She understood what this conversation meant, both for herself and for him. She had spent years hating him for what he had done, but now, as the years had passed and her own journey of healing unfolded, she realized that this moment wasn't just about him. It was about her. It was about confronting the man who had broken her trust, who had hurt her, and finding a way to finally let go. The meeting took place in a small, quiet cafe, far from the glitzy surroundings of the gala, far from the prying eyes of the public. Claire sat at a corner table, her hands folded neatly in front of her. Her eyes, though soft, held a depth that Jacob couldn't ignore. The woman before him had endured more than he could ever truly comprehend, and she was still standing. It was a humbling sight, one that made his chest tighten with guilt. He took a seat across from her, the words that had been swirling in his mind for so long finally ready to be spoken. I'm sorry," Jacob began, his voice shaky. He had rehearsed the words 1,000 times, but now that they were finally leaving his mouth, they felt foreign, inadequate. "I know sorry isn't enough. I know I can never undo what I've done to you, to Emily, to everyone. But I need you to know that I never meant to hurt you. I was selfish. I was a coward. And I regret it every single day." Claire's eyes remained steady on him, her face calm but unreadable. She had heard apologies before, and she knew the weight they carried. But she also knew that apologies alone didn't heal the wounds. They didn't erase the years of pain, the years of betrayal. They didn't change the fact that Jacob had chosen someone else over his wife when she needed him the most. "I don't need your apology," Claire said, her voice quiet but firm. "You took something from me that I can never get back. You abandoned my sister when she was at her most vulnerable. You chose her over me, over everything. But what hurts the most, Jacob, is that you didn't just betray me. You betrayed yourself. You betrayed the man you could have been. The word stung. Jacob's eyes dropped to the table, and he swallowed hard. He had known the consequences of his actions, but hearing them out loud, the harsh reality of what he had done, was more than he could bear. Claire continued, her voice steady, her gaze unwavering. I've spent years asking myself why. Why did you do it? Why couldn't you see what was right in front of you? Why did you think abandoning your wife, your partner, the one person who had stood by you, was the answer? Jacob could feel the weight of her words crushing him, but he had no excuses. Nothing he said could justify what he had done. Nothing could bring back the time he had wasted, the people he had hurt. I can't explain it, he admitted. I was lost. I was so consumed by my own fear, my own weakness, that I couldn't see beyond my own desires. I couldn't see what mattered most. Claire's gaze softened slightly, but the pain in her voice didn't waver. You didn't just hurt me, Jacob. You hurt yourself. You'll never get that time back. You'll never get Emily back. And you'll never get the man you could have been. The silence that fell between them was thick, heavy with years of resentment, of unsaid words. But as the moments passed, something unexpected happened. Jacob's shoulders slumped, his defiance draining away as he finally, truly, acknowledged the depth of his wrongs. I know, he whispered. I've lost everything. And I don't deserve anything more. But I need you to know that I've spent every day since trying to figure out how to make it right. I don't expect forgiveness from you, Claire. I just want you to know that I'm sorry for everything. Claire studied him, her heart heavy but resolute. I've had to forgive myself, Jacob. I've had to forgive the part of me that thought I couldn't move on, that thought I couldn't heal. And now I see you for what you are, a broken man, just like I was. But that doesn't mean I have to go back. That doesn't mean I have to forgive you in the way you want me to. Because I don't need you to be a part of my life anymore. Jacob nodded, the bitter taste of that truth sinking in. I understand, he said quietly, standing up. I'll leave you alone now. I just needed to hear you say it. As Jacob walked away, Claire felt a strange sense of peace wash over her. She had said what needed to be said. She had confronted her past, and now it was time to let it go.